meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 51 of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. Pursuant to order of reference of Monday, May 30th, 2022, the committee resumes its consideration of Bill C-13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act to enact the use of French in Federally Regulated Private Businesses Act and to make related amendments to other acts. As per our routine motion, I would like to inform the committee that all members have completed the required login tests prior to the meeting. On this topic, we have technical issues, which is why we're starting a little bit late. I would also like to tell members that if they'd like to participate, they must wear the House-approved headset. Without this headset, they will not have the floor. And there we have it. So today we are resuming our clause-by-clause study of Bill C-13. I would like to welcome the officials from the Departments of Canadian Heritage, Justice, Treasury Board Secretariat, who are here to support the committee members with any technical questions. So I would like to thank these people for supporting us. Julie Boyer from Canadian Heritage, including Marcel Fallu and Chantal Terrien. For the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, we have Alain Desruisseaux. And from the Department of Justice, we have Warren Newman and then Carson Quell. Thank you for being with us and providing your judicious counsel as needed. We are now resuming the clause-by-clause study with the debate on Clause 21. We are therefore resuming on the amendment CPC 21. Mr. Godin, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are some amendments that stir up more emotions than others. I don't think CPC 21 will lead to Liberals doing any infighting. So for those who are here in the room or listening online, as you asked last time, I would like to speak to bring some clarification. Mr. Godin, so you're proposing your motion, but I do have to say that if this amendment is carried, BQ 24, 25, and 27 cannot be moved because of a line conflict. Now that you're presenting the amendment, I just wanted to highlight the fact that BQ 24, 25, and 27 will not be able to be moved because of a line conflict. Go ahead. So I'd like to take over. So CPC 21, that Bill C-13 in Clause 21 be amended by replacing lines 3 and 4 on page 11 with what follows. 41.1, the Government of Canada shall. By replacing line 6 on page 11 with the following. Support and assist their development taking into. C, by replacing line 9 on page 11 with the following. Foster full recognition and the use of both. And D, by replacing lines 11 and 14 on page 11 with the following. Due to predominant use of English, shall protect and promote the French language. I have nothing else to add to this, Mr. Chair. This amendment simply comes to correct the wording in the Act to make it easier to understand. I believe these are all syntactical changes. Mr. Beaulieu, go ahead. Well, since this would make many block amendments fall, I do have a sub-amendment to propose. It was sent to the clerk. Was this sent in paper or over email? Great. We will take a moment to distribute it. So we will suspend shortly. Did everyone have a chance to read the document? This is a sub-amendment proposed by Mr. Beaulieu. It's a sub-amendment to CPC 21. Mr. Beaulieu, you have the floor to present your amendment. What's important here, and this was said before, it was stated in the white paper, is that we want to protect French, including in Quebec. So at point 41.1, we're adding that the Government of Canada shall. We're adding as well as Francophones in Quebec and to support their development. Further on, and line 8, page 11, we would add, and to foster the full recognition of use of the full recognition and use of both English and French in Canadian society while taking into account the fact that French is the official common language in Quebec. So that's my sub-amendment. But I do have a question for the witnesses, hoping that they could clarify something. What is the definition of an Anglophone minority that you use? I think you use the indicator of the first language. How do you define Anglophone minority? Thank you for the question. In the Act itself, there is no definition. There is no definition in the Official Languages Act. And in Canadian heritage documents, you use the criteria of the mother tongue. But it's not in the Act. There's no definition in the Act. There are indeed many definitions from a statistical standpoint. The first official language spoken is one of those, because the first official language spoken, according to Statistics Canada, includes 33% of immigrants in Quebec. That means that with this definition, we go against the objective of protecting French in Quebec. It would take 90% conversion rate to maintain French in Quebec, but that's another topic. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. So on the sub-amendment proposed by Mr. Beaulieu, are there any questions? Mr. Godin, you have the floor. I would like to speak to the officials. Maybe my question is actually for Mr. Fallu. He's the one who wrote the act, as far as I understand it. In the description of the minority, there's a spirit. Ms. Fallu's answer was not very clear. It seems there are many definitions, and we need more clarity since we don't have a definition in the Act. Can you tell us what your working definition is? What is the definition that you use in the field, on the ground, on a day-to-day basis? You're giving me more credit than credit that's due. Maybe my sources are incorrect, but essentially, as my colleague was saying, there is no official definition in the Act. On an administrative front, we use many definitions. One thing that's in the Act that hasn't been changed yet is that there's a minority Anglophone and Francophone communities, and they're both part of the linguistic duality in Canada. So it's understood that in Quebec, the minority is Anglophone, but it's not written in so many words. Well, you know, Mr. Chair, I'm trying to understand something. I understand your explanation, but I find it's a little too elastic. When we don't have a set definition, it leaves too much space for interpretation and creates gray areas. Can you confirm or deny what I'm saying? The interpreter didn't hear the answer. I would add this. When we speak about minority language communities, when it was included in the Act in 1988, which is the Act that's being amended now, There's a clause from the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that includes this because it speaks to minority language communities. On paragraph 3, the Francophone or Anglophone minority in a province. This is what's in the Charter. This can vary because for services, we might speak to a catchment area that's not identical, but the idea of a Francophone or Anglophone minority in a province is well understood. We don't need to define it any further. It's something that we live on a day-to-day basis in Canada. One moment, Mr. Beaulieu. Mr. Godin. I understand, Mr. Newman, considering the fact that you work for the Department of Justice, this is something that's very clear for you. There's no space for interpretation. But Patrimoine Canada, Canadian Heritage is not saying the same thing as you. You have different points of view. For you, it's clear and defined. There's no room for interpretation. Is that what you're saying? I'm not saying we have two different visions. I'm saying that when these terms were used in the Act in 1988, it was knowing that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms spoke to minority communities, be they English or French, in a given province. Mr. Beaulieu. I was wondering this. In Clause 23, do they use an indicator? I think they speak to mother tongue. Yes, they use many criteria. There's the mother tongue in 23(1)A that doesn't apply to Quebec, as we know. But this is really about the acts that stem from this, the right to education. But to use the term Anglophone or Francophone minority was to add something that wasn't in the Act in 1969. That Act, the first Official Languages Act, didn't speak to minority groups. It just spoke about mother tongues. So here we're trying to protect minority groups, and this is the terminology that we've used. Thank you, Mr. Godin. You have the floor. In my colleague's sub-amendment, I have to say that I'm not opposed, but I find it redundant. This is repetitive. This is something that is stated elsewhere in the Act, but out of solidarity, because I myself am a Quebecer and I want to protect French in Quebec and throughout Canada, I will support this sub-amendment from Mr. Beaulieu. Are there any other questions? So we are now ready to put the question on the sub-amendment to CPC 21. Madam Clerk.
Monsieur Drouin?
Contre.
Madame Lapointe?
Contre.
Madame Kayabaga?
Contre.
Madame Lalonde?
Contre.
Monsieur Godin?
Pour.
Monsieur Gourde? Pour. Monsieur Généreux?
Pour.
Monsieur Lehoux? Pour. Monsieur Beaulieu? Pour. Et Madame Ashton?
Contre. Okay. Donc, 6 contre.
6 nays, 5 yeas. We're now back on the main amendment, CPC 21. If no one wants the floor, we'll put the question. There are no hands up. Madam Clerk, we're voting on CPC 21.
Contre.
Monsieur Drouin?
Contre.
Madame Lapointe?
Contre.
Madame Kayabaga? Madame Lalonde?
Contre.
Monsieur Godin?
Pour.
Monsieur Gourde? Pour. Monsieur Généreux?
Pour.
Monsieur Lehoux? Pour. Monsieur Beaulieu? Pour. Madame Ashton?
Contre. Donc, 6 contre.
6 nays, 5 yeas. CPC 21 is defeated. This brings us to BQ 24. I will not present it. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. I won't be presenting BQ 25 or 26 because we would like to get moving. For those of us who are watching from home or around the table, BQ 24, 25, and 26 will not be presented. This brings us to CPC 22 on page 67 of the amendments package. You have the floor, Mr. Godin. Mr. Chair, I would like to finish updating my document. So CPC 22 is really to bring some grammatical corrections. We want to reinforce point 2. In order to respect your instructions, Mr. Chair, I will read it, that Bill C-13 in Clause 21 be amended by replacing line 11 on page 11 with the following: the Government of Canada recognizing and taking into account that French. So what we're adding here is we'd like to give this a little more teeth, and not baby teeth. We want this to really work, and add that it takes into consideration that French. We understood your metaphor. Are there any questions about CPC 22? Madam Clerk will put the question.
Pour.
Monsieur,
C'est beau, hein?
Pour. Monsieur Drouin,
Pour.
Madame Lapointe,
Pour.
Madame Kayabaga, Madame Lalonde, Monsieur Godin,
Pour.
Monsieur Gourde, Monsieur Généreux,
Pour.
Monsieur Lehoux,
Pour.
Monsieur Beaulieu, Madame Ashton.
Pour. Donc, à l'unanimité, CPC.
Unanimously, CPC 22 is carried. This brings us to BQ 27. CPC 23 has been withdrawn. Is that correct, Mr. Godin? Yes. Okay. So moving on to BQ 27. Mr. Beaulieu, we're not going to be presenting it. We will not be presenting BQ 27, BQ 28, or BQ 29. So BQ 27, 28, and 29 in the amendments package will not be presented. This brings us to NDP 5 on page 72. Madam Ashton, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We want Bill C-13 in Clause 21 to be amendment by replacing formal, non-formal, and informal opportunities for members of English and French. And I would like to explain the reasoning behind this amendment. I would like to take the time to thank the RESDAC and their chair, Ms. Monique Odek, for her testimony. They demonstrated that it's important for us to recognize the education continuum from early childhood to high school, and that education is essential for minority language communities. But beyond formal education, we need to have space for continuous education, for literacy, for education that doesn't necessarily lead to a diploma or a certification, and it is still essential for our social fabric. We need to integrate also a robust Francophone immigration plan to this act. We need to make sure that short programs and organizations receive federal support for programs that will allow for cultural exchanges between those newcomers that come to us and for those who are already here. Today, we are facing extreme challenges. Half of the Francophone community has difficulty communicating, reading, and has linguistic insecurity. A person who is challenged in expressing themselves in their own language will have difficulty participating in their community and will become assimilated. I will add the post-pandemic context, labor shortages, and the impact of technology. Francophones in minority language situations need to have skills, adapt to their situation to face this new post-pandemic dynamic. The amendment of the article with the addition of formal and informal education will allow us to have a more holistic approach for education. This will contribute to a new paradigm and a better way to collaborate between formal education institutions and informal education groups. Once again, I would like to thank Miss Odette for her hard work with RESDAC and everyone else who works in the informal education field, who sent us a clear message on the path forward.
Merci, Madame Ashton. Monsieur Godin, allez-y.
Monsieur le Président, je suis tout à fait en accord avec l'amendement du NDP.
I completely agree with this NDP amendment, and that RESDAC is a network for literacy and skills development. We've heard them testify. They've made great presentations, and I believe we should integrate this in the Act in order to reinforce what will happen in the years to come. So I am for this amendment made by Mrs. Ashton. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. I'm also for, inasmuch as it could also be useful for francophones in Quebec. There is also an illiteracy issue in Quebec, so I believe that it does help. Well, I can't answer your question. I'm asking you, well, do you believe that this will also apply to francophones in Quebec? I'll ask the witnesses. The current commitment doesn't say that explicitly, but there are other elements in Section 7 as amended that could eventually allow for that. Any other questions? I don't see any. Vote for NDP 5.
Monsieur Drouin.
Pour.
Madame Lapointe.
Pour.
Madame Kaya-Baga. Madame Lalonde.
Pour.
Monsieur Godin.
Pour.
Monsieur Gourde. Monsieur Généreux.
Pour.
Monsieur Lehoux.
Pour.
Monsieur Beaulieu. Madame Ashton.
Pour.
Merci à tout le monde à l'unanimité.
Thank you. Unanimously. NDP 5 carried. CPC 24 at page 73 of our documents. Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that this amendment that seems quite simple is in fact a major one, in the sense that here at the Official Languages Committee, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but over the years, I believe in 2019, 2020, we had a battle with the Ministry of Industry, the Minister of Industry at the time, Mr. Bain, and the Director of Statistics Canada, and all the members, including the Liberals, and some people who are no longer here to represent the Liberals, and we united together to make sure that we would include in the census, in the short form and the long form version of the census, a counting of rights holders. If we want to improve the Official Languages Act, this amendment is a major one. It's important, and this will show that the government is serious in order to make sure that we will have a true picture of minorities, in order to allow those minorities to then obtain adequate treatment. The modernization of the Official Languages Act, it was written in '69, it was changed in the '80s, and now we're trying to go forward. I hope, Mr. Chair, that we won't go backwards and that they won't suggest something like estimate. We have to be serious here, Mr. Chair, and it's on behalf of all minorities today that, unfortunately, I am quite emotional when I speak to this, and I hope that it shows and that we will give particular attention to this amendment in order to make sure that we will be serious here. Otherwise, we're going to be wasting our time. So I think that it's very important that we're able to correct. The Government of Canada is committed to periodically estimate the number of children. That is a catch-all term, and it doesn't clearly respond to the needs that exist within minority communities. So I believe that we need to think about this. We have to have a serious reflection before voting against this amendment. I think that it is an obvious decision, and so I'm lending a hand to all members of the committee having a vote to make sure that we go ahead and not backwards, that we look towards the future and that we reach the objective that we've set. I have three: stop the decline of the French language, protect both official languages, and to promote them. We need data, though, not estimates. We need hard numbers, and that's what we need to work with. And this is going to show to what extent we're serious. Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Ashton, withdraw. Mr. Seri, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Godin, for submitting this amendment. We all agree, as Mr. Godin indicated. I don't want to prolong the debate, but we want to continue the work that was done in 2021. When we look at the request made on behalf of rights holders, so it's clear that we do want to do that, but I'm going to propose a sub-amendment here. It was sent out by email, and now hard copies, I believe, in the room. So when we're talking about CPC 24, proposing to amend Clause 21 of Bill C-13 by replacing lines 20 and 21 on page 11, be amended by substitution after the words Government of Canada with the following: periodically estimates using necessary tools the number of, so that the text reads, 4. The Government of Canada periodically estimates using the necessary tools the number of children, etc. So I think that this is an amendment that seeks to make sure that we will continue the work that we've been doing and continues the work done by the members of the committee who have worked so hard to work on behalf of rights holders. So this is my amendment. If we need to take a short pause or answer questions, we can do that. Mrs. Ashton? I have a question on this sub-amendment. A question for the experts here. First of all, I wanted to say, on our side, we support that questions asked of Canadians during the census have to be clear on this issue. We cannot underestimate the importance of the short-form census either, and we have to make sure that this is part of the important work done by Statistics Canada. I think there's a will for this on all sides. But on this sub-amendment, does this commit or does this make sure that we would have clear answers on the number of children, on the rights holders, on how many there are? And are we going to make sure that Statistics Canada will have to ask this question to all, to the entire Canadian population? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking at the sub-amendment, what it says is that the Government of Canada periodically estimates, using the necessary tools, the number of rights holders. And the reason why it says estimate is because we can get close to perfection with the census, but a census is a snapshot in time. So we're saying estimate because it's possible to confirm using lists from school boards, for example, the exact number. So all of this goes together. So it's a close estimate, but it does give us the opportunity to add other tools to revise the figure, using school board data, for example, to confirm. Thank you. Mr. Généreux, you were on the list. Thank you. Could you lower your microphone a little bit? It's hard to hear what you have to say. This sub-amendment speaks to the necessary tools and the number. Are you understanding the same thing as I, that different tools can be used, not just the census? The census would be the main tool, of course, that the federal government would use in order to estimate the number of rights holders. Other tools used by the provinces can also be used to correctly determine the other tools. An example that I used was the lists from school boards in order to confirm the numbers. If the census was 2 years before, and there might be more children on the list, of course. Yes. I have a question. Yes. So what you're saying, for me, those are not tools. They're rather, it's data that was collected by school boards and provinces, etc. So that's not a tool, that's data. A tool that allows to obtain this data in the Act. What I want to make sure is that if we go ahead with Mr. Serre's proposal here, is that other than the different census, because we do have a census every 4 years in Canada, other than the census, what are the other tools at the government's disposal? I'm speaking here of the federal government. What tools can be used in order to obtain the data as to the number of children who are rights holders? You understand the goal and the objective sought after. What are the other tools other than the census? The other tools would be really in the field of education, and this is a provincial jurisdiction. Mr. Gould. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're speaking about tools that are of a provincial jurisdiction. So will this amendment force the school boards to provide this? Normally, if the school boards say no, they don't provide it. The school boards is linked to the provincial government, and the federal government is far away. As an MP, sometimes you have to ask a permission to go speak to students. And if you get along with them, that's great. But if not, maybe not. So I've already asked for lists, and I was sent a congratulatory letter for graduations. And some school boards say yes, and other school boards say no. It's at the discretion of the school board. So how are you going to estimate a number of Francophone or Anglophone children in a province if you have the same problem that we're experiencing? There is no obligation in the Act for the school boards to provide a list. So this estimate may or may not exist. Well, thank you for your question. The answer is that when the government makes a commitment, we have to be able to respond to a commitment that we make. So we're saying that the Government of Canada periodically estimates using the necessary tools. But your question is, can we force this on school boards? No, because that is a provincial and a territorial jurisdiction, and we cannot force school boards regulated or under provincial jurisdiction to produce documents. Thank you. So I'm sure that your answer is correct. So then these lists could not be a valid tool, because we won't have that tool at our disposal. If you'll allow me, I would like to add something more specific. We also have to remember that we have the Statistics Act, and this lays out the mandate of Statistics Canada, and it grants powers to the chief statistician to be able to obtain data from other entities. So this does exist. So we have to take this into account. And an example, in Statistics Canada, yes, they do control the census, and they have carried out post-census surveys. This does exist as well. Thank you. Mr. Drouin. Mr. Lehoux? Sorry. I saw you. You were first. That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have trouble with the amendment because it speaks to periodically estimate. And in the main amendment, it says the federal government is committed to. So the government of Canada is committed to. And to me, this is a huge difference. What's important for me is a commitment. To cause to be counted. Let's call a spade a spade. Yes. So normally the census is every 5 years, every 5 years, as to the rights holders. So I'm going to mention this, but if for the first time in 20 years, the government of Canada met its objectives with regards to Francophone immigration outside of Quebec, 4.4%, that's correct? Yes, okay. So if the government continues to reach its objectives, we're underestimating the amount of Francophones in our Francophone communities outside of Quebec. So if we look at one single tool, the census, we will be underestimating, and this means less services for Francophones throughout the country, less services for the Anglophone community in Quebec. And so other tools, for example, if I use myself as an example, the wait lists of the school boards, how many students want to register in a school, and this could be another tool used to determine the demand for Francophone schools or Anglophone schools in Quebec. And this is what we're talking about here. So I understand that the federal government can't force anything on provinces. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Serre. Thank you. I just wanted to continue on the same vein. I understand the observations made, but I'm trying to situate this. I was member of a school board for 6 years, and all Francophone school boards, well, it's to their advantage to provide data, so it's not an issue of it's not a problem. As a school board, we really want to provide these numbers. We really want to share this data with the federal government. It's to the benefit of the students. So, Mrs. Boyer, with regards to your experience, is there a benefit? Is there a benefit to ensure this? So if we speak to a commitment, we're talking about a commitment by the federal government. It's true that we don't have jurisdiction. Some people are trying to mix this up because there is a provincial jurisdiction for education. But if we leave the provincial jurisdiction aside, is there a benefit to the Francophone school boards to send their data on a regular basis to the federal government? So I think the amendment reflects that. I think we're saying the same thing.
Go ahead, Ms. Boyer. Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. Indeed, this is why the amendment proposes to add a reference to other necessarily tools that could contribute to a more accurate estimate of rights holders, for example, during census. Thank you, Ms. Boyer. Do you have a question, Mr. Serre? No? Mr. Généreux. Ms. Terrien, Ms. Boyer, I would like to ask you the same question differently. with an ideal act. Imagine a perfect act, which is kind of what we're trying to do. We want to improve it as much as we can. In the amendment and the sub-amendment that's currently on the floor, could it be formulated in another way to have a better bill? Do you understand what our goal is, my colleague, Mr. Serret and Mr. Godin, what we're trying to do? Is there something we can do better in how it's written? Thank you for the question. I cannot speak to this. I don't have an opinion as to the content of your question. But we have to remember this. As Ms. Boyer and my colleague said, we are in a commitment. Education and rights holders, these are the people we're talking about. This falls under education. This falls under provincial and territorial jurisdiction. So the federal government does have certain tools, for example, the census and other things that were mentioned, but we do not control all of the parameters. This is because education is a provincial jurisdiction. I would also like to mention this. In Clause 4, in C13, which the committee has already voted on, there is the statement of an obligation for the Department of Canadian Heritage to implement this obligation. Just so everyone can understand, you're talking about Clause 4 on page 11 of C13? I'm talking about Clause 4 of C13. This is on page 4. Page 4. It's on page 4, line in Clause 4 of C13, it's point 2.3 that speaks to the obligation. Mr. Chair, can you help us find the article in question? Ms., can you repeat what you were saying? Can you repeat what you were saying and how it relates to the sub-amendment? Okay, so the connection I'm drawing here is that the sub-amendment and the amendment we're talking about are in Part 7 of the Act, and there is an obligation. Because we're in Part 7, there are many obligations or commitments that the government is making because, yes, the federal government can act, but it can only act in collaboration with the provinces and territories. In this case, in order to implement this commitment, the clause that I'm referring you to confers an obligation to the Department of Canadian Heritage to establish a process for the Government of Canada to implement its commitment under subsection 41.4. So the paragraph that we're talking about in Part 7.
Ça va, Monsieur Généreux?
Do you understand, Mr. Généreux? Do you have any other questions? Now, Mr. Godin and then Mr. Gourde. Mr. Chair, I'm flabbergasted. We're trying to convince us that estimating is stronger than counting. I would like to read you the two dictionaries. Estimate is the act of estimating, of determining a value for something that we attribute to something. This is what I can Google as a definition. Now, to count. This is the action of counting. Making an inventory. So they give examples here. We're talking about counting fortunes, and here the example, Canada's not doing so well on counting fortunes. But anyways, I think it's difficult to understand. Mr. Chair, I'm going through you, but I'd like you to tell the officials that they are trying to convince us that school boards can send us lists, and it's a benefit to them. It benefits them to share this information, so they would benefit from this. This is what I heard from Mr. Serré. It's in their best interest, so we can rely on them. I think it's important in a federal act to have the tools necessary to depend as little as possible on. Ms. Boyer, earlier you said that the head statistician has great powers. If he didn't have to go ask other people for data and could use his own count on a regular basis, that would be a tool. But we're not saying in the act that only the census can be used. We're seeing that the federal government has the obligation to count. I know that your department is extremely competent, and you will find the tools necessary to count. Stop trying to tell us that estimates are stronger than counts. With all due respect that I have for the public service, this makes no sense. Now, this week, I met with the National Federation of School Boards. I'd like to define the Francophone school boards, probably. The FNCSF, who reminded us how important it is to count. We've talked about the lists and the benefits to school boards, but even the school boards are telling us it's not enough, that they need it in the act. And then beyond that, this is a request that was made by the FCFA. So why is the Liberal Party tabling a sub-amendment that will come weaken the act to poorly serve minority groups throughout Canada? I don't understand the sub-amendment, Mr. Chair. Is this a proof that this party, which we've seen in the news, that this caucus is a shambles? A point of order, Mr. Chair. With all due respect that I have for my colleague opposite, let's focus on the amendments and talk about the content of the amendments. I know he wants to comment on our caucus. He can join our caucus if he'd like to comment on it, but it has nothing to do with the sub-amendment. Yes, indeed, we have to keep it to the sub-amendment. Mr. Chair, I receive what my colleague is saying. I have a lot of respect for him. I think we agree more on international politics than domestic policy, but this is part of the debate, Mr. Chair. It shows that there are questions on our side with regards to the government's intentions. Mr. Chair, to reinforce my argument on counting, I would like to tell you this. Between 1982 and 2001, the census underestimated the number of children that were eligible for French school outside of Quebec and didn't for English. And let's remember that the census at that time was just a sample. We made estimates and then we would extrapolate. Statistics Canada, I'll give you another fact. Statistics Canada made sure that there were questions that sought out to count, not to estimate, be added to the form. Recently, so that we can consult 100% of the population. So why are we met with resistance now? Why are we not giving ourselves the tools we need to serve minority language communities? I don't understand this, Mr. Chair. This is a tool. We want to improve our tools. How can we be against this? So my colleague's sub-amendment comes to weaken my amendment and weakens the Act in general. So again, I would like to extend a hand and invite our colleagues to think before supporting this sub-amendment and to leave the amendment as is so that as soon as we receive royal assent, we can count with more accuracy. This is still within statistics, but it'll be more precise than estimating. And we know this from our past experience, that we can't base our work on the goodwill of a school board or another organization or a municipality. We don't control this data. Let's use the tools that we have at our disposal. And I am convinced that if this is not sufficient, public servants will be able to find the tools to be able to count rights holders. I think we should start with the census, but I'm not focusing on the census in my amendment. I'm just talking about giving ourselves the tools to have a most accurate understanding of the situation. These people deserve our attention. These people deserve the financial supports that we can give them. And there's impacts that we need to consider here. If there are fewer people, there's less money. If there's less money, there's less services. And if there's less services, there's less training. And then you can see that French will continue to decline throughout Canada. This is very important, Mr. Chair. We need to think very carefully before voting on this sub-amendment. And like I said earlier, my colleague, for whom I have the delight of working on other files, isn't here this morning. He's always here on Friday mornings, but this morning, I don't know why. That's up to them. Okay, let's stay on the sub-amendment. No, Mr. Chair, the sub-amendment is that this guy fought with you and me at the Official Languages Committee. So I think it's very important to mention that the member for Prescott-Saxville-Quaticook isn't here. Thank you, Mr. Godin, Mr. Gourde, and after Ms. Ashton. Mr. Chair, I would like to come back on the costs brought up by my colleague, Mr. Godin. The tools. If the government commits to giving itself all of the tools required to have the information to provide the services, there are costs. An estimate through Statistics Canada, with the information provided or not by the province, without any knowledge of whether they're willing to give this data, and when they do give it to us, the information comes too late. Statistics gives data too late also. What if there is an increase? Or if we want to provide more services in French schools in English provinces and the same in Quebec for Anglophone communities in order to have English services, it's too late by the time we get this data. If there is political will to have the tools, we need to know from birth when these children are born so that we can plan the services in time. Between birth and age 5, these kids will be in university by the time we create the services to early childhood education. So we cannot rely on any provincial tools. We have everything we need federally. We sent a check to all children in 1 month. It could be pretty easy to understand if we're going to be sending them to English school or French school. That would be possible. If we can send checks to every child, we should be able to figure out if they're English or French. And here, we're not interfering with provincial jurisdiction. Maybe that's a tool. This would give us a number. In time, in 2014, we would know how many births there are, and then they would have enough services in time. We would at least have a 5-year head start. This would give us an idea. but to have tools or estimates. By the time we act on those, they're already in university, and we won't know if they would have preferred to go in English or French university, or if they didn't even have the choice because the schools in other provinces were already too full. We know that they're currently too full. We can't estimate because it costs. So if the government commits to giving itself the tools, it will commit to finding the right number. And finding the right number is something that is doable. It's definitely doable if the will is there. Well, if we want to slide, we can leave it vague like it is now, and it'll be vague for another 50 years. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Ashton. I would like to recognize that we are sharing important concerns as to the future of Francophone communities throughout Canada. Let's recognize this. These data are essential. I want to ask a clear question. Is there a question on will the question on rights holders' children remain within the census questionnaire? Ms. Boyer. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question that should be posed to Statistics Canada, but I'd like to clarify this. There seems to be confusion between the words that we're using in Part 7 of the Act. If I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to take a step back to explain the difference between commitment and obligation. Please go ahead. In Part 7, we list a series of commitments. There are 4 commitments that the federal commits to without having all of the tools. They commit to protecting and promoting French, the language among minority people, Article 23 of the Charter, and the fostering the development of communities. This is something that the federal government is committing to doing, but it doesn't have all of the levers because it recognizes provincial jurisdiction. Right after, we speak to obligations, where the government controls all of the factors and where the federal government can force the implementation of positive measures. Mr. Godin's amendment seeks to turn a commitment where we don't control all of the levers into an obligation. To meet this obligation, to count, and I'll talk to you more about counting and estimating, but to turn this into a commitment, we need to have the right tools. Otherwise, we won't be able to fulfill our obligation. To do it properly, we will need more tools that fall under the provincial and territorial government's jurisdiction. So here, we need to correct the fact that we don't hold all of the levers and that the government estimates on a periodic basis the population by using the tools that are available. So that's the difference between commitment and obligation. When we don't control all of the elements, we commit, and when we have all the tools, we have the obligation. Now let's talk about estimates and counts. If we estimate, we use the census. This happens every 5 years. We estimate the data. As I explained earlier, in 2023, we'll have more, and in 2024, there'll be more, and before the next census. So these estimates, because numbers evolve over time. For the people who are in the room, there's the long form and the short form. We could use the census in the short format, and then it's no longer an estimate. Yeah, no, I understand it's over every 5 years, but it's not done annually.
It's not annually. So all of this to say, to count, we need the support of other tools that are in the provinces and territories. So it's a terminological choice between an estimate and accounting. If it's estimate, we can do this federally. It's a snapshot in time. If it's to count, we have to have lists from the provinces, from the school boards who have exact figures, and on a punctual basis. Thank you.
Donc,
Okay. Mr. Godin? Thank you. Mrs. Boyer, maybe it's hard for me to understand what you're talking about here, but our amendment requires a commitment. In the current act, in the current bill, rather, it says commitment. And so I'm using the same term, is committed to. So the obligation is already there. It's not my amendment that creates a commitment. What I'm saying is that instead of doing an estimate, we have to count. So you should not be giving me an intention of something that I'm not doing. It's important to specify this. What was said by my colleague, the official from Heritage Canada, I'm not creating any extra commitment. I'm simply trying to determine a method. A method, for me, is to count. And this is stronger than an estimate. Mr. Chair, in the report of the Official Languages Committee, under Honorable Denis Paradis, who was chair at the time, there was a report, and my colleague, Mr. Genereux, spoke to this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we might have made mistakes in the past. I'm going to read this, and I'll ask Mr. Boyer to interpret this afterwards. Official Languages Report, despite this, witnesses are categorical. The short-form census of the Canadian population that is limited to 100% of the population. This is what you made as a comment earlier. The short-form census and the long-form census, it's all of the population that is being counted. 100% of the population, and the only possible option and to adequately count the rights holders. So I'm not the only one saying this. It's written there in a report, that MPs wrote at the time and that was validated by analysts, clerks, and everyone, and is found in the history books of Canada. So, Mr. Chair, I believe that it's important. It's important for us to rectify the facts. And so I would have a lot of things to say, but I'm not going to filibuster here. Mr. Genereux. Mr. Chair, we passed a report. We adopted a report here to give orientation. You'll remember we fought at the Official Languages Committee to make sure that this issue of counting, especially in the census, would take place. And as my colleague said, it's not anything extra. It's just the terminology, because the words are important. And if my colleagues are listening, I believe that, well, I totally agree with Mr. Godin. We cannot allow ourselves to dilute this. Yes, of course, the necessary tools exist. The reality is that if we don't impose in the Act the obligation of counting, and if we continue to use estimates, all of the francophonie, all of the minority language communities will be affected by this. We have to be consistent. And historically, we've had an opportunity that we won't have for another 5, 10, 20 years to really make sure that we have the correct terms here. And as my colleague, Mr. Lehoux, was saying, we have to call a spade a spade. We need to count here, not just estimate. And there's a fundamental difference between both terms. And my colleagues have to understand the importance. We can't dilute it. We've worked together here at the Official Languages Committee. We're trying to make sure that there will be accounting. And the short form census is 100% of the population. So I agree with my colleague, Mr. Godin. Everyone has to think about this before voting.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres
Anything else on CPC 24? No? Vote? No, rather, sorry, on Mr. Serre's sub-amendment to CPC 24.
Pour.
Monsieur Drouin.
Pour.
Madame Lapointe.
Pour.
Madame Kayabaga. Madame Lalonde.
Pour.
Monsieur Godin.
Contre.
Monsieur Gourde? Monsieur Généreux?
Contre.
Monsieur Lehoux?
Contre.
Monsieur Beaulieu?
Contre.
Madame Ashton?
Pour.
Donc, 6 pour.
6 for, 5 against. Sub-amendment is carried. Now, CPC 24 as amended. Anything before the vote? Mr. Godin, Mr. Généreux? Well, I'd like to suspend for a few moments. I would like to consult with the clerk.
Nous suspendons.
We're going to start up again. CPC 24 as amended. I would ask the members to be seated, please.
OK. Donc, sur CPC 24 tel qu'amendé,
CPC 24 as amended. The vote.
Monsieur Serré?
Pour. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, I wanted to address you. Mr. Chair, I know that there was an intervention on behalf of the clerk. I would like to ask for unanimous consent to withdraw.
alors voici.
Okay. The vote had begun. The only way of doing this, Mr. Godin, is, well, with unanimous consent, we can do anything. Is there unanimous consent to withdraw CPC 24? The vote had begun. The vote had begun. Okay, Madam Clerk, let's start again.
pour.
Monsieur Serré. Monsieur Drouin?
Pour.
Madame Lapointe?
Pour.
Madame Kayabaga?
Pour.
Madame Lalonde?
Pour.
Monsieur Godin?
Contre.
Monsieur Gourde? Contre. Monsieur Généreux?
Contre.
Monsieur Lehoux?
Contre.
Monsieur Beaulieu?
Contre.
Madame Ashton.
Donc, 6 pour, 5 contre.
6 for, 5 against. CPC 24 as amended is carried. BQ 30. BQ 30. BQ 31. Pages 75 and 76, not presented. Okay. CPC rather, 26. CPC 26. Before giving you the floor, Mr. Godin, if CPC 26 is carried, Liberal 4 and 14 and 15, and NDP 6 cannot be studied. If CPC 26 is carried, Lib 14, 15, and NDP 6 will not be presented because of a conflict in the lines. Thank you. Here's another amendment. In my opinion, this is extremely important. After having heard a lot of testimony, especially from the FCFA, I think that the difference in the words is important. It's only de to les in French. And de is more general than les in French. So I'm going to read this and then I'll present my argument to try to convince my colleagues to pass this amendment. CPC 26, that the Bill C-13 in Clause 21 be amended by replacing lines 30 to 32 on page 11 with the following. The positive measures necessary for the implementation of the commitments necessary for the implementation of the commitments under subsection 1 to 3 are taken. Mr. Chair, I'm going to recapitulate now. In May 2018, there was a trial where the FFCB had to fight in court, had to have a court challenge so that their investments would be returned into the Francophone community for employment centers. I believe everyone is aware of this court challenge and the result. And it's on this word, de to les. This is why the justice found for the Federation. Following this decision, Bill C-32, where things were done correctly. The Court of Appeal and federal court, well, they went to appeal on this. You'll understand that it's something for the federal government to sue an organization defending minority language rights. So in C-13, it is written the positive measures necessary are taken. And I have indications that they want to change les by des in French. We'll see. It's important to leave this and to withdraw that they estimate, as we see. We've had this debate about counting versus estimates. If, Mr. Chair, we adopt CPC 26, we will be strengthening the Act. And I think that is the objective of all members here, is to serve both official languages. If ever, in in the future, we would have an intervention to take out les to replace by des in French. We would be setting back C32. So, Mr. Chair, I think that the amendment proposed here in CPC 26 is essential in order to respect the spirit of our work, in order to respect the FFCB and to respect the FCFA, which is the umbrella organization representing over 200 minority Francophone organizations outside of Quebec. So, Mr. Chair, I believe that it's essential for us to be able, with such a small amendment, is very short. It does two things. It leaves the word les in French instead of des, and we take out estimate. We have argued the elimination of estimation, so I'm going to stop there. I think that it's extremely important for us to adopt this amendment. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my colleague for having tabled this amendment. I would have a question, and I don't think it's a change of des to les. It's already in the Act, but it does modify necessary. And so I would ask the officials, and listen, we heard you speak on necessary, what this would do, positive measures necessary for. We're not talking about some, we're talking about the positive measures that are already in the Act right now, and we're adding necessary. So what does this add for you if we add the word necessary? Thank you. Thank you for the question. So here, these are commitments under Section 7, and there is an obligation. The positive measures, this reflects case law in C13, and what we have here is necessary. And we have to ask the question, who decides what is necessary? What measures are necessary? Is it the department who will have to determine if something is necessary or not, this positive measure, or is it the stakeholders who have to prove that it's that a measure is necessary? So here, the word necessary could have a limiting impact on measures taken because there is judgment that needs to be made. So is it necessary for stakeholders? Is it necessary for the department? The department could say, we don't think it to be necessary, and for stakeholders, they would have to prove why it's necessary. So it could have a limiting impact, an unexpected impact. So when we talk about estimated, this gives the choice of the department to impose it or not. So there's no proof of burden that is applied. Mr. Fallu could perhaps bring some clarification. Yes, so the obligation of taking positive measures has been introduced in Section 7 in 2005 through S3. And over the years, and I'm not going to go over all of this, there was some criticism as to the implementation, and case law has evolved. And the latest case law is the one from the Federal Court of Appeal in the case of the FFCB.
So essentially, the measures in C13 and the current wording of 41.2 is clear, even if the words are slightly different. So it is a binding obligation for federal institutions. But as Madame Boyer was explaining, the fact that we would add necessary to put in some sort of filter is not what they're thinking of, but maybe there could be an upper limit to demonstrate why it was necessary, whereas now in the current act, it gives institutions latitude to have better means. Any other questions? Mr. Godin, go ahead. My question is for Ms. Boyer. In the wording that's proposed in CPC 26, the organizations still have the possibility to judge of the necessity. Can you explain the difference between federal institutions to make sure that they implement the measures that they deem required? I don't see how having the word necessary positive measures is the same for public servants. They will be the ones who determine what is necessary or not. What they feel is indicated or what they deem necessary is all based on interpretation. There's no resistance. There's nothing that will obstruct the work of public servants. So can you explain your reasoning regarding necessary being more binding than deemed indicated? I don't understand. So here, I might ask for support from the Justice Department to clarify the distinction between the two terms. So there is a margin of appreciation when we put in place positive measures. That it considers appropriate grants a discretionary power to federal institutions. They are in charge of their own programs and services and how they conceive of them and deliver them. This gives them some latitude in the implementation of this commitment. But that said, when there are other elements that strengthen this elsewhere in C13. These criteria help a lot and will speak to the Federal Appeals Court that you mentioned, that the measures be concrete, that they be made hoping for favorable outcomes while recognizing the necessity of protecting and so on and so forth. I won't read to you all of the statements, but when we look at the evolution of Part 7 since 1988, we've gone much further than the initial commitment, which was a solemn commitment that didn't even seek to create obligations. Now there are obligations in place. The obligations have to materialize, but we still have to maintain some sort of latitude or discretionary power for these institutions to implement these measures in the way that they consider appropriate. This is the wording that we prefer to use. Is that good, Mr. Godin? Go ahead. Okay, so you finished your statement by saying that this is a wording that you prefer. I understand that this is a preference, but you have not convinced me that the positive measures that are necessary will be binding in the daily life of public servants and in the application of positive measures. Necessary is a strong word, and there can be debate about what is necessary and what isn't necessary. Appropriate in that wording leaves some discretionary powers to the institutions to implement their commitments in the spirit of this commitment without binding them to the point where they have to justify every measure and make it satisfy this criteria for necessary. Mr. Newman, could we use your answer in such a way? Can we use your answer exactly in the same way when we debate the words estimated and indicated? No, but what I'm saying here, no, let's not resume that debate. No, but earlier we were talking about estimations. You're saying that necessary is binding. It implies an obligation. There's interpretation, there's discretion. How do we define necessary? Necessary for me is not necessarily necessary for you. It's the same thing. When I judge something, consider something, it's also a discretionary term. So how is one stronger than the other? This is the question I have for you. I guess you proposed this because you consider it to be more binding than considers appropriate. For us, necessary will open a debate on whether or not we've met the threshold for necessary. We're seeking to maintain discretionary power for these institutions, and the current wording reflects that. It reflects that desire to maintain some flexibility in the implementation of these obligations. We still presume that the institutions will be acting in good faith, given the other dispositions in Part 7. So you agree that necessary is a stronger word. But it won't stop the process. It's more binding, but it's not closed. There's still room for interpretation. Our goal here is to force the process so that it can be more open to positive measures. We think necessary is a little bit stronger. We won't debate about semantic any longer. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Godin. Would anyone else like to speak on this? We're at CPC 26. No other hands are up. Madam Clerk, I would ask you to move to the vote.
Contre.
Monsieur Drouin,
Contre.
Madame Lapointe,
Contre.
Madame Kayabaga,
Contre.
Madame Lalonde,
Contre.
Monsieur Godin,
Pour.
Monsieur Gourde, Monsieur Généreux,
Pour.
Monsieur Lehoux,
Pour.
Monsieur Beaulieu, Madame Ashton.
Contre.
Donc 6 contre, 5 pour, CPC 26.
6 nays. CPC 26 is defeated. This brings us to Lib 14. If Lib 14 is moved and carried, then Lib 15 will not be able to be proposed because it is identical, and if it is adopted, NDP 6 on page 80 will not be able to be moved because of a line conflict. So Lib 14, Mr. Drouin, you have the floor. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will read it into the record that Bill C-13 in Clause 21 be amended by replacing lines 30 to 32 on page 11 with the following. The commitments under subsection 1 to 3 are implemented by taking of measures, positive measures. Since I have the floor, I would like to instead ask the officials, these people that are spending so much time with us recently, to comment on this amendment in comparison to the text that was formerly in the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So here, what it does is that in the first obligation of Part 7 of the Act, it says that the departments, the commitments that were accepted just above must be implemented by taking positive measures, plural. So we maintain that there are many measures, and then we remove everything we just discussed with the previous amendment about judging whether it's necessary or appropriate. A department can deem something not necessary or not appropriate. So here we eliminate the judgment calls and we say that departments must implement positive measures to meet the commitments mentioned above in Bill C-13. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Boyer. Mr. Drouin, that works for me. Anyone else? Mr. Godin, you have the floor. Mr. Chair. What I called materialized. In Lib 14, we say here that the commitments under subsection 1 to 3 are implemented by taking positive measures. So we're saying de compared to les in French, and my understanding of the wording here, and I'd actually like to hear the officials' opinions, Mr. Newman and Ms. Boyer. Can you compare de mesures and les mesures in French? For me, de are measures, les mesures is more binding than de mesures. De mesures is non-specific. We can implement some, but not all of them. Again, we're talking about specific words here. It's very specific, but we're doing things now. We might as well do them well. So for me, de mesures should be les mesures in the French version. So in English, it would be the positive measures as opposed to just positive measures. So we want to make sure that all of the measures that have been identified will be implemented and that they will be implemented. We don't want them to be implemented according to someone's judgment. If there are 10 measures, we'll only implement 3, and the other ones, we'll just put them on the back burner. So Ms. Boyer, I'd like to hear from you, and then Mr. Newman. Thank you for your question. In my opinion, this reflects the current state of jurisprudence because we don't put the positive measures, we just say positive measures, plural. So many measures must be undertaken. But I would like to ask my colleague from Justice that this is indeed that this really reflects the current jurisprudence. Mr. Newman, this is also my understanding of things. As I said earlier, the idea here is to have a series of measures that follow decisions from the appeals court. The appeals court had to deal with the text as it was written, and now we are proposing to eliminate one of the elements that they believe to be appropriate to focus on the fact that institutions will take measures. So we can conclude that it will be the appropriate or necessary measures. In advance of the implementation of these measures, Madame Boyer explained that the wording includes the measures in general without restricting the institutions and thus removing any flexibility in the application of this obligation. Mr. Godin, you have the floor. Mr. Chair, the wording of the bill, C-13, written by the current government says that the positive measures be taken. I won't start the debate about the appropriate matter, about the commitments under subsection 1 to 3. There's an amendment from the same government that comes to weaken or soften the bill, in my opinion, by adding are implemented by taking of positive measures. So we're taking the out of line 29, and we're not even putting some, we're just putting of positive measures. So I'll take my example from earlier. There are 10 positive measures. For example, with Lib 14, we could apply all 10 or 3 or 1. It's really not specific. What currently states in the Act is that all 10 would have to be applied. Why are we trying to diminish the bill? Is your question for someone in particular? Well, Ms. Boyer or Mr. Newman, anyone else who would like to speak? Ms. Boyer will answer the question. I don't think that this diminishes it. It doesn't reduce the commitment. It's clear that there's an obligation for the federal government to act. This is a more direct way to say that positive measures need to be taken. And yes, they are plural, but it doesn't state how many measures. Because here the Crown can decide on many elements. The government decides, for example, on the budget. But it is clear that the obligation requires the implementation of measures, plural. It's because the sentence doesn't end there. These are positive measures if there's a period, but there are positive measures to implement the commitments under subsection 1, 2, 3. So it's what is considered appropriate. In English, it's very strong.
Positive measures are...
Every federal institution has the duty to ensure that the positive measures that it considers appropriate are taken for the implementation of the commitments under the subsections 1 to 3. This is stronger. Now the positive measures are taken for the implementation under subsection 1 to 3. To me, it's strong wording. Before you continue with another question, Mr. Godin, we have to finish at 10:45 on the nose, so I'll let you continue, but we will have a hard stop at 10:45. A quick question for Ms. Boyer. You said earlier that you have the obligation to list measures and that there are financial impacts. In this wording, are you required to share all of the measures, or will legislators determine what they are? No, the amendment doesn't do that. Mr. Seri. I think Ms. Boyer responded to Mr. Godin's concerns. It doesn't weaken the bill. But I would like to ask Ms. Boyer a question. What are the rules in Part 7? Can you give us an example? Because this doesn't weaken the bill. Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to give the floor to my colleague.
Un règlement, il y a un pouvoir réglementaire existant qui date des...
There is existing regulatory legislation for Section 7. There's no current regulation in place, but the regulatory authority remains. It's the same regulatory power as what we find in the current Act, but the reason in Section 7, if we want to ensure the implementation of commitments, I would refer you to the subsequent paragraphs, 41.6 to 10, if you want clarification with regards to federal institutions and implementation. So clarification as to steps that have to be taken, and all of this can be specified through regulation and also with C13 through policy instruments of the Treasury Board. And this is not right now in the Act, but it would be a possibility with C13. So there are ways to be more specific and to provide more guidelines to federal institutions. I would wish for it to be officials to vote on the budget, but that's not currently the case. Thank you. Mr. Beaulieu. I think we've been really reasonable. We want the debate to go ahead as quickly as possible. We want to look at all these amendments because up until now, we've gone over 20 clauses out of over 70. We've voted on, we have 44 amendments. We're on page 78 of 229. I think that it's very important to manage to end the debate on this because it's not only the application of the Act, but there's Section 54 is important for Francophones inside of Quebec. Point of order, Mr. Chair. We're on Lib 14 right now. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu, but we're looking at Lib 14, the main amendment. Mr. Chair, I'd like to table a sub-amendment to Lib 14. I think that it's been sent around. The interpreter does not have a copy, though. No, not yet. You have to table it. Okay. I'll read it, but we won't have time for debate. I don't think we can extend the meeting. That Lib 14 be amended by substituting that positive measures are taken for the implementation of the commitments under subsections 1 to 3. I'm going to, so it starts. Positive measures are taken for the implementation of the commitments under subsections 1 to 3. So line 29. Line 29. Positive measures are taken for the implementation of the commitments under subsections 1, 2, 3. Mr. Godin, I understand the reasoning for the amendment, but on procedure, when you propose the sub-amendment that eliminates the substance of the... No, hang on. No, it's after that. Yeah, but it's only that. But this is what I'm trying to explain. What I'm being told. Well, Thank you for trying, but no, it's out of order. I appreciate the trying, but anyone else? The vote, please.
Pour.
Monsieur Drouin.
Pour.
Madame Lapointe. Pour. Madame Kayabaga. Pour. Madame Lalonde. Pour. Monsieur Godin.
D'après vous, Madame Pierre, contre.
Monsieur Gourde.
Contre.
Monsieur Généreux.
Voilà.
Oh, il n'est pas là, désolé. C'est bon. Monsieur Lehoux.
Contre.
Monsieur Beaulieu. Monsieur Beaulieu, pardon? Abstention. Et Madame Ashton. pour. C'était un pour.
Donc, 6 pour, 2 contre.
6 for, 2 against, 2 abstentions. Lib 14 is carried. Meeting is adjourned.